for 2 years, this was a weekend thing that we kept on adding different features to solve our problem eventually. So in 2019, we decided, hey, maybe it's time to quit our jobs and maybe do this full time.
Welcome to the Founders with Peck podcast, where I interview diverse founders from all over the world. Basically, I want to learn and share these founders' amazing journeys with my network and my friends. And the journey is not always linear, and I want to showcase that. And it's not necessarily all about high growth VC fueled unicorns in Silicon Valley. And I'd like to showcase founders from everywhere around the world. And I'm your host, Peck Pompet. And on today's episode, we have Nattu Adnan, and he's the CTO of LottieFiles. Can you tell us a little bit about LottieFiles and a bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Peck, for having me. LottieFiles, this is an interesting thing. Usually is for a startup, I feel like it takes a couple of years for you to explain what you actually do. So before you know what LottieFiles is, you need to know about what Lottie is. It's a new animation format that is like super, super tiny, sort of a JSON-based file format. And LottieFiles is sort of like tooling the community around this file format and mostly empowering designers and developers to use this format and sort of bring this motion to the products that they're actually building so that this becomes more humanized, right? So somewhere there. I'm actually from the Maldives, super tiny island nation, and mostly people don't hear about it. And I'm based in Southeast Asia, trying to build this as a startup from a weekend project now to, I don't know, like in a high growth stage right now.
Yeah, you're very humble. So LottieFiles, I looked at some stats, is used by over 65,000 global companies, including Nike, Google, Microsoft, Netflix, Disney, Duolingo, and TikTok, and many more, right? The top 500 apps on the App Store now use LottieFiles, and you've also raised over $9 million led by M12, which is a Microsoft venture fund. Is that all correct, or do some stats need to be updated?
I think that's about right, but because it's in high growth stage, both as a company and the user base, the stats are mostly outdated.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. Well, let's start from the beginning. Tell us. So Maldives, what was it like growing up there?
It's small. You will literally know everybody in the island. You will like everyone. You'll hate everyone. Everybody's your ex, sort of.
How long does it take to drive around the island?
So usually all the islands are about 1 kilometers meter, and it takes about, I think ours were quite big. It takes about 25 minutes to take a ride around. But I think the best thing that I remember about it is everywhere you go, you hear the sound of waves. So even when you're at home, you hear the sound of waves. And since there's no light pollution, when you get out of your house, you can see the Milky Way right up there.
Oh,
that is amazing. The two best things that I sort of miss most right now.
Yeah. I think I lived in Penang, so we have some commonality where I've spent a lot of time growing up in Malaysia, but I grew up in Penang, and the island you can drive around in 2 hours, but you can hear waves for many parts of the island. So I understand what you're talking about, and even now I sleep. When I sleep, I prefer the sound of waves. So I have that on. Yeah. So what brought you to Malaysia, and why Malaysia in particular versus, say, I don't know, I think it's pretty common to start maybe a global startup in, for example, Singapore.
Yeah. It was very interesting because growing up in the islands and living in the capital city of the Maldives, where the startup wasn't really startup industry like wasn't really, I would say, and we felt like we hit the top mark where I ran a web agency for about 5 years, was working on my own sort of startups around publishing, news media, and so forth. So there wasn't anything new to do. And it was very like easy for people to go to countries like Sri Lanka, India, and then even Malaysia, mostly for studies as well. So at the time I was married and I actually left my job or like freelance projects that I was doing and moved to Malaysia. Not thinking that, hey, I'm gonna find a job here or anything, but I thought like I would support her and then do the freelance work right here. So came here and started with sort of like diving deep into the startup industry right here. Even though on the personal side the marriage is doing work, you will, if you search around, you know the Maldives has the the most number of divorces as per country. Maybe this is another study to go into, but the interesting part is that I actually got into lean startup, and that's where I sort of like met a lot of founders that who were trying to build their first startup. And lean startup framework was a really nice one to validate your problem, your solution, and sort of go through this journey. So I spent a couple of months and few years on this ideology of what is the best way that I could try a startup or validate that. But at the same time, I was sort of like coming from the UX and UX background, trying my sort of like design skills and so forth. And throughout the journey, became sort of a product designer and then deep dive into the UX research and this side of things. While at the back of my mind, the lean startup method was there. So I think that is sort of the transition. We're coming from like hacking back in the Maldives to a whole new startup culture in Malaysia, where it was just like beginning out as well.
Was there a good, how was the startup ecosystem in Malaysia?
That was for us to come from out of almost nothing to something where people openly talk about their ideas. I think that was like very eye-opening for me, because usually we have this idea of like, hey, I cannot share my idea because somebody might steal my idea, to where everybody is like very openly sharing their ideas. So that was very eye-opening. I couldn't compare that with any other startup sort of like cultures in Singapore or anywhere else. But Malaysia, that we had like a lot of new people, new founders, have this urge to get something now. So there was a lot of energy. There was a lot of events that I was like, hey, I shouldn't miss any of these events. So I actually been going to almost every one of them that I found around.
Tell me about failures. I'm assuming LottieFiles is not your first startup. Tell me about kind of other startup ventures that you tried.
Back in the Maldives for about 5 years, I ran this web agency where it was very early for companies or agencies to do a mobile app and some sort of that. So me and my friend, one of my best friends, we started a web agency. The name is really funny. It's called Semicolon, because we feel like you have to use a semicolon to execute something. And for 5 years, we were doing it, but we didn't know how to scale, because we both are devs and I was doing the design side of things as well, and also the project managing and communicating and all of that. And mostly for a country that who's exploring into the technology side of things, um, us being sort of the creation side, we didn't know that usually the projects that we work on are usually done by a huge number of teams, right? Like huge, like 3 or 4 people. We were just full stack designers and full stack sort of tech guys, so doing everything, back end, front end, mobile app, web app, UI, UX, because the client says, hey, I want a news website just like CNN. So
Just
that
like
is our
CNN.
benchmark. Yeah.
And
So
but you
back
have
then,
2 people.
yeah. So throughout that, so for about like 5 years, we are just like maximum number of sleep that we could get is like 4 hours. So for
Wow.
about 5 years, it's just the same, couldn't scale up. And at the end, I remember like we were taking a Euro trip, and on the way back, I was like, man, I can't do this. I will just go and be a fisherman. And because like I couldn't just handle that doing for about like 5 years. I was so much stress, where there was so much to learn, so much we didn't know. We were like, hey, even accounting, going to bank and going to win these projects, to everything. I was like two guys. So that was just too much to handle. I think that was like one huge failure that we learned so much from, that I think today that I'm very, very conscious about. The second one is that when I did the UI UX one, the first job here in Malaysia, um, this is more about like now being working in a company versus back then it was like building something, right? So working in a company, the UX part and sort of meeting and the whole communication and all of that kicks in. It was very new to me because usually we were working with friends. Now it's like a whole new space where the importance of setting the expectation is being a UI UX designer. When things are not clear, things would go south, and at the end I was working nonstop, and at the end it was falling on the life side, and then eventually I got fired
Oh, wow.
from the job. So that is where I think like went downhill completely, and I had to like take myself up, like, hey, this is a new beginning. I've got to start. I've got to figure things out. And the next step, I think the next job that I got moved from UI to a product designer. And then I think since then it was sort of like, I don't know. I feel at least better
Yeah.
from that learning that I went through, both on the personal side and both on the work side. And it wasn't always about opportunities. Like there was opportunities coming left, right, and center. But if I couldn't scale the entire business up, then either you will just go down with it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, speaking of agencies, we have that commonality where I too have an agency, and that's actually my primary means of income and day job and livelihood. And yeah, we've grown very slowly. Not that I want to necessarily scale to be like huge, massive consulting companies like some people I know, but yeah, I like you, I didn't have all the skills. I've had multiple failures because yeah, I didn't know sales, I didn't know marketing, I didn't took it takes so many things, check boxes to be good at for a successful company. You can't just be good at design and engineering and think, oh, you'll be successful. You have to learn how to scale. Like you said, you have to learn how to communicate and work with other people. Those are valuable skills to have that I think nobody teaches you, and it develops over time and experience. And sometimes experience, our failures first. What gave you the idea for LottieFiles, the startup? Yeah, how did you see that as something?
Interesting. So the next job after the lean startup thing was about a home service marketplace, where home service marketplace, you can't really make an app look that sexy. But that was the time when mobile apps were really sexy. So what we were doing was putting a lot of visuals around it, like cartoon characters and then all of that. There was always a need to add motion, but and so exploring different ways within, but it just died there because it's so hard for you to actually code the animations. And then one of my friends, and so when we got out of the Maldives, we got like about 5 or 6 people in design the entire country back then. So we all are very connected.
So all the
And so
designers left the Maldives.
yeah. I mean, all the UX designers. It was a
Yeah.
very new term back then, right? So whenever something new comes, we actually talk about it. And then one of my friends, so hey, like Airbnb introduced this library called a player called Lottie. So posted on the group, and he was the one who actually like bought the domain. I was like, hey, do you want to do something about it? And I was like, I'll think about it. Maybe over the weekend I'll do something. So I actually over the weekend went to a cafe, and 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 he gave me a few sketches as well. He's a UX designer, and so we created sort of an initial draft of it. Like took me about 8 hours, build the entire thing using Laravel, PHP, and then sort of hosted it on a like a self-hosting platform, and then asked a few of our motion, because at that time I was very early. So as a library, we didn't even know that these files can be played on the web because it was named as something else. There was no Lottie web, there was only Lottie Android and iOS. And as we dug deeper, we saw that, oh, okay, this was actually a file format somebody else did 3 or 4 years earlier called Buddy Moving. So we were like, oh, they actually have a web player that we could put on our website, and
Oh,
then
wow.
put these 3 or 4 files and put it out. And then we send a message to one of the guys at Airbnb and saying that, hey, look, we've look what we did over the weekend. And then we heard back, right? So that was the initial thing. It took us about 8 hours to do the first version and put it out there. There was like 4 animations that we found on the internet, and then put their names in there. I was like, oh, okay. Because that's the reason why it's called LottieFiles, because the idea was to put few Lottie animations. And there was no term about LottieFiles back then. I think we actually gave the term because it's a Lottie player. So and there comes the problem, like, hey, why is it a JSON file while you call it a Lottie file? So there's like whole confusion back then. And I think what followed was us trying to use this animation on our products. That means I have to test this animation. And for me to test this animation, I have to build an Android app and iOS app and run it every single time to see whether this animation works, because the
It's very
features
heavy.
that support, yes. And also I think the biggest problem was the features that supports Android app versus iOS apps were different. So
Mhm.
that means even if I could see on the After Effects, hey, this looks nice there, it won't support on Android or iOS. So I'll have to check every single time. That means I'll have to, it's a designer. Imagine I don't even know how to do an Android app or iOS app. I'll have to figure a way to play. So what actually followed on LottieFiles was our journey of actually using this file. We built like small utility mobile apps where you could scan a QR and then play it on Android, iOS
Oh,
without
wow.
building your app. So that actually followed, like, for 2 years. This was a weekend thing that we kept on adding different features to solve our problem, eventually solved all other designers' problems as well. And in 2019, we decided, hey, maybe it's time to quit our jobs and maybe do this full time.
Oh, wow. So yeah, so at first it seemed more like you were solving problems, but it wasn't apparently obvious that you could quit your job and make this a full-time thing. So it is kind of running on sort of slow burn until there was some sort of moment. Is that kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I think along the journey, like, I never thought this would be something that I would quit my job, because it was cool. Lottie was so niche that only few companies were using. And then, like, I couldn't even explain what Lottie is to anyone. And for about 2 years. And when I quit my job to I like one mine. So this is in the middle, right after we started Lottie, and then um, in the middle, I quit my job as a product designer. I was leading the team. And I was like, maybe is it time for me to go to Lottie or do Lottie as a serious thing? I was like, maybe not ready. No, not yet. So I joined another company where I found like my co-founders, and then went deeper into the product design route, where Lottie again grew, being on a side. So usually I think there's this saying, things that you cannot apply at your day job, you sort of apply to your weekend or side gig. So I think Lottie became that thing
This
that
is it right
usually
now.
this is it.
This
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah, exactly. You never know. You never
You
know.
never know.
So I think Lottie became that, where things that anything that I learned at the job that I could not apply, I was like, hey, this thing is cool. Let me just go and do that. And I think one thing that like one thing that I really loved about the entire journey was that how accessible it was to reach anyone. So I used Twitter on day one. I tweeted to guys at Airbnb. We became really good friends. Two guys in like Disney, to Google, to like just tweet to them and they respond to me. I was like, this is magic. Because like back then, I think without social media, I couldn't even have imagined reaching anyone. And people are so nice. They respond straight away. They give me feedback as like, Nattu, these things are breaking. And now it's like, coming, hey, Nattu, can you just like charge our cards because we are putting our free stuffs there. So it's I think that is what I value most, these connections that I made over the years. And Lottie is the topic, but it let me actually connect with a lot of amazing and talented folks around the world.
So you're much braver than I am. I'm very shy on Twitter. I don't think I would just randomly start messaging, chatting with brands. So I commend you for having the initiative for that. And I think that's one lesson there that other founders can take away is it doesn't hurt to just reach out, and at worst they'll just maybe ignore you and you don't get a response. That's something that I struggle with. I think what served me well is developing relationships, and then I become comfortable and have once I have those relationships, I'm much more open. Same thing with ours. I don't think, you mentioned about Clubhouse, and I actually, Marissa Louis started the Designers Club Clubhouse, which is where we met, but without her dragging me on the stage, I wouldn't have just decided, hey, I want to just jump on. I would never start a club, and I would probably never just start talking unless somebody kind of dragged me on stage. So that's something that I think I struggle with, is a little bit of shyness. but I'm very grateful that she did, and that we met. At what point so when you quit your job for Lottie, was Lottie already making revenue and making some money at that point? Was there a business model then?
Not really, but because it is hosted on the internet, and we were paying sort of like the hosting bills. At one point, what we did was we added these carbon nets, where they actually serve very designer-centric, selective ads on the website. And because the website was getting traffic, so I was getting enough money to actually pay for the hosting. It covers the hosting bill, but nothing else. So it wasn't making money. It's still not making money today. But I think along the way, to scale it, we wouldn't even know, because at one point it's like over the weekend, you work on it, you leave it. If something goes down, probably somebody is going to tweet about it. So that's how I actually found it out. And it didn't hit me until my hosting provider messaged us saying that, hey, you guys are a little bit above our limit. Your limit is about, I don't know, 10 GB or something, or 100 GB, but you're like more than they were like, your quota is like 30, now you're above 120 or something.
Oh, wow.
Just a little above. And then
just a little
at the end of that email, I was like, PS, we love LottieFiles. So this is from the hosting provider. I was like, oh shit. So I've got to like now really look at housekeeping and maintaining this and all of that. So I think those are like little cues that I saw that like is in terms of scaling it, is these are like growing, because every milestone, I remember we were posting on Facebook, hey, our weekend project got like 10,000 downloads, and soon it was 1 million downloads, but it still was that weekend project. So wow. In our mind, it was still the weekend project that we don't think that there's any value.
Some people would kill, as soon as they get 1 million, they would go fundraising right away. You're like, maybe it's still a weekend project. That's amazing. At what point did you decide to, so you quit your job. At what point did you decide to raise money?
Yeah, so raise money was right after we decided. So I met like one of my co-founders back in my last company, and we're like, hey, because this has enough traction, enough people are using it, maybe there's something out there. The idea was even back then, like, hey, we will just create a marketplace and we'll just sell Lottie animation and make 1 million, right? So that was the easiest model out there. And so I wasn't even the first employee of the company. I got one of my friends to join. And then we started this as like an entity, incorporating the entire thing and getting, a small space in rework. And so that's where it started. But because when we looked into the tooling side of things, there were like big companies actually using it. So, and we had conversations with them about like, hey, what other things can we improve? Why are you actually using us, right? So seems like there was like a real pain point that we were solving. And because they've been on it for so long, it feels like, and the biggest thing was, if we took this away, they're going to cry about it. And everyone was like, yes, like we can't live without it. So I think that was like enough validation that we are giving so much value to them. And that's when we actually reach out for about a seed funding from a few friends as well, and got enough money to set up, incorporate, and then start hiring a few employees. So that was around 2019, about the first quarter of it. And yeah, so
Yeah.
that is, I think, yeah.
How hard was it to raise money from M12, or how many other firms did you reach out to, and what was that process like?
So interesting, right before that on our seed round, we actually reached out to Adobe as well because they have Adobe Design for Fund as well. During pandemic was actually when we reached out for, and we weren't even ready for Series A round. We were like exploring that, hey, because being first time founders, like I had no idea when the next one happens. It's just when you start the conversation and very much learn about it. And during the pandemic, we actually talked to a lot of founders, and then also investors. They kept on reaching out because I think one thing that we did was we announced our like Adobe design, like fund for design around the time the pandemic started. So there was a lot of like chatter around, and we were getting a lot of like inbound queries about, hey, like, are you guys ready for Series A or not? Are you guys looking for funding? We're like, hey, let's start talking. So I think these conversations taught us a lot about like where the company is at. Are we creating enough value? Are there enough people returning as well? So it made us look deeper into the metrics that we have, whether like, is this worth what we are claiming it to be worth? And so we did talk to a lot of like VCs, and that's where we learn about like sort of look into what really matters and learning what we are not really seeing. Because from a designer and an engineering point of view, okay, we have a nice product, but we're not really looking at where we're going. What does the world will be in next 5 years or 2 years? Or so we miss a lot of context right there, which investors help us actually see that. And what are other companies in this space, they are progressing, what they're at right now, and sort of think of this more in a strategic way. I think that was something very, very interesting. It was really hard because during lockdown, now you have like 20, 30 calls. So every day is like just calls and trying to gauge this thing around dealing with the pandemic and lockdown that we have. So that was like a time that we were trying to figure out how to work best, where in the company, I was like, a lot of my friends were in the company. So the ones that I met in before, the ones that I like started companies with before, they all came together to be a part of this,
Nice.
helping to build this, right? So that was a time that we were trying to figure out. And I think probably would be not the right time to go look for a Series A funding.
Wow. What were some of the things that investors made you think about that you didn't think about before? And this would be really helpful for first-time founders.
I think two ways when I think about it is the structure that you have, because being a small startup, the way that an investor looks at you could be like their preference as well. That hey, for example, all of my past, if you go and look at LinkedIn, will be I was a designer in the previous companies, product design. But my 20 years, I've done tech as a hobby thing. So there's no way that anybody, when they do due diligence on you or me, they would see the tech side of me at all. I was like always design. So maybe in a way that, hey, the first thing is, hey, you guys need a real tech guy. So I think, and a lot of times this gets to us to question yourself that, hey, am I really capable of doing this? Or do I need to replace someone right now so that it would make the investors happy and they sort of know that, okay, I'm listening to them and sort of that. But I think, and when I like talk to other founders as well, hey, there's no right or wrong way. This is your journey to figure out. This is your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah.
And you figure out as you go. I think that took a while for me to get it. Like, hey, this is the journey. Like, there's no right or wrong way. There's only choices that you make. And mostly you will learn.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, and always like think about like, or at least believe that your intentions are right, and if it makes sense to you, then go ahead, do that, but also do get those feedback so that you're very conscious about it.
Yeah. I challenge the need for a tech co-founder these days. I mean, looking at all these low-code, no-code
No code.
platforms, a friend of mine built a project management tool for an industry, like a very niche industry. And the front end, yeah, it's a front end is built on a no code tool. And he was actually able to raise money for it. You know, hey, the tool works and he has paying customers. It doesn't, yeah, I think I think technology is today, maybe for example, like 20 years ago, if you told someone you couldn't start a website easily without data centers and servers, and now you just go to AWS or Google Cloud, and like it's a solved problem. And same thing with some parts of technology and engineering and tooling is you can get away with or get pretty far without having a tech like a pure like hardcore tech co-founder. I don't know. That's my opinion.
No, I think I agree with you on some points where, for example, when we did like LottieFiles in the very early stage, all the notifications would come to a Telegram group where like I'm on the move and then I can just open right there and approve these animations. So all the animations you see on the website are like manually approved by me most of the time for at least for 3 years. And a lot of these, and I really love no code, low code tools. So I think this comes from not me not being full on tech, but being a part of sort of lean startup guy,
Yeah.
where what are the things I can hack and then put on these things where I don't have to go and code the entire thing.
Right.
If this was a project that I had to code the entire thing, I probably wouldn't have spent all of that time coding everything, right? So I think these days that barrier is becoming smaller and smaller, where a lot of these founders, they can go and build using the tools provided, but they're still learning and there's still validation. There's still the whole process of figuring your problem solution part. It doesn't go away, but it helps you go to market faster by actually leveraging on these tools. And I think like every day hear a lot of inspiring stories that is coming up, like Makeupad to a lot of them like leveraging on these low code tools. So I actually agree with you. But I think as you build a company, when you scale it up, that's where the limitation comes from.
Sure.
That's where sometimes you have to like bring in your own expertise or like on
yeah. Well, I think after you raise the 9 million, that's when you make some serious technology investments. So it makes sense now. Looking at the LottieFiles website, it's apparent one business model is the marketplace, and designers post stuff that there's free animations and then there's animations for sale. Is that the primary business model right now, or what are the other business?
I
revenue
think,
streams?
and one of the reasons why we did the marketplace was because there were a lot of designers or motion designers giving their animations for free on the website. I don't see much of the online communities where a lot of designers give like their files for free. They
Free.
spend hours and hours to create these high quality animations and then give it for free on our website is under Creative Commons license, and you sort of give attribute as well. But and and we see thousands and thousands of them coming in. And for me, when we think about it as a designer, if they're showcasing their stuff, animations, and then also giving it for free, you should provide a place for them to actually make some money out of it as well. And if this is sort of the platform where we attract a lot of people, and if they cannot find what they're looking for, maybe they could even approach these people and designers and then hire them as well. So there's like we've been able to hire me. We don't take any cut in between. They
So
can
it's just
just
a job
communicate them
board.
directly.
Yeah.
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 And also, and all these animations that people share, they were like freely. They were like once of ones. So if anybody is looking to get a pack or something for their mobile app, there's almost no way. And I couldn't go and ask these designers, hey, whenever you do an animation, do the entire pack and give it for free, right? So I
Yeah.
think the marketplace came in where enabling the designers who give these free animations a place where they can actually make money.
Yeah.
And that was the idea. And not any time that we had the idea that, hey, we'll make a lot of money making this as sort of a marketplace thing.
Yeah.
And one interesting thing came from here was that initially when we started the company, like I mentioned earlier, that we thought that we were going to build a marketplace model and we'll make $1 million out of it. So we actually paid a lot of designers to create animations for us. And when we actually launched, we're like, hey, if we are inviting others to sell on this platform, if we are selling, then it doesn't really make sense. So we actually gave all these high quality animations for free to
Oh,
everyone
wow.
publicly, and then let these designers actually sell on the platform. We recently did an acquisition platform called iconscout.com, where they are a full-on marketplace which sell icon illustration and 3D assets. So we're like, because our heart is about creating tools around Lottie and then support the community. And if we are also selling the animations, there's also really high quality free animations, then it's so hard. It's competing with each other as well. So we thought like, hey, what if we could let the designers sell in a proper marketplace where they can support, they can sell packs, and then there's a community around it, and there's a bigger space, bigger exposure as well, right? So our main monetization is not in there. We are still trying to experiment sort of monetization methods. How could we sort of do the value capture of the value that we create within the Lottie
Yeah.
community as well? So it's still some things in the work that we are just experimenting with. What are the possible routes that we can go with monetization? But I think being at the heart of an open source file format, our heart is very much on creating tools and enabling and making, and at least working towards making Lottie a bigger success
Yeah.
than just this company. So I think that was the foundation of it as well from the start. And even now, our pushes or like our efforts are into that direction. We know if we generate enough value today, then there is possible routes that we can actually go and capture it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I ever would have thought that, one, I could make money off of an open source file format, and two, it's not even my open source file, somebody else's source file format. So I think that's a great, yeah, idea, especially a new platform that's not already well established. How much can a designer or an animator, motion designer expect to earn? Like, give me some examples of maybe people who have earned money at LottieFiles.
I think because and since I haven't been on sort of like Icon or illustration marketplaces. I don't know what to compare that with, but from what I've seen, they could actually make thousands, even monthly as well. If you do this as sort of like a, hey, this is something that I want to like keep on doing. And as you add, because this is revenue, you will keep on getting as well. And for a fact, I know there are like a few users or a few companies doing this as a full-time thing, because that would generate a lot of money, and they'll just have to do this once, and it just keeps coming back. And I think when I look back, I would have never imagined that people would actually be able to sell Lottie animations and actually make money, because this was such a niche thing. But looking back, I know in 2019 when Webflow announced Lottie integration, that's when people actually discovered that, hey, I could use Lottie on the web as well, because before it was all mobile. Because the whole reason the Lottie first came about by Airbnb was Android and iOS player, but back then it was originally created by this gentleman called Hernan Torrisi from Argentina. That was like a few years ago, and then he created a body moving extension and all of that. So there was like every piece of the journey we kept on. It's like somebody kept contributing to it. Even big companies like Airbnb contributed to it and became popular on mobile. And
Yeah.
then when Webflow brought it to the web sort of side of things, it kept on growing. So I think that market is growing bigger and bigger as more people adapts to it, and soon we'll see hopefully natively being supported on Office or
Yeah.
different platforms as well. And the need for these premium assets will keep on increasing. So even if you're learning about Lottie animations and trying to self-view, try that, because you would see that being increased, because there was no search about Lottie earlier than 2017. So it's very new, but
Yeah.
it's catching up really, really fast.
Yeah,
So
you're
yeah,
riding a wave. And I can see similarities between something like this is analogous to me for like Twitter Bootstrap, right? Twitter Bootstrap created a whole
yes,
ecosystem. There's WordPress, like Twitter Bootstrap themes, like admin dashboard themes that we ourselves have worked on and built on and purchased. So I think there's, there is a opportunity there that you've captured riding a wave, especially when Airbnb jumped on it, right, and adapted it and created Lottie. There's something analogous to be made there. So this is very cool. Well, we're coming towards the end of the podcast. So are there any, like, having been through your journey, like what was there any advice you'd give yourself, or like something that you wish you knew or would have done different?
this last 2 years is sort of the most interesting, I would say, journey of my life, because one part is that for the longest time I was a designer or a tech guy, and now the team is about 32, with the acquisition is 50. So
Wow.
you're not a designer, you're not a tech person, you're a people person now. And you start the company with about, let's say, 5 or 6 people, very early employees, to and every 6 months this is a whole new structure, it's a whole new like organizational structure. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned is how to communicate. I think that is the biggest thing, because um, being a designer it's so easy when you actually ask for feedback, versus now you're sort of like, I would say, like dealing with people, multiple communication, and all of that is hard, because I was never trained for that. And I never thought that in this journey, this is what I would be doing. So in my mind, I was like validating the product. Like, we are going to ship new features. They're going to be amazing. And we are
Yeah.
going to like create so much value. But in here, when I look back, it's so different, where my job is not to give solution. My job is to hear the problem, articulate, let them figure out the solution, and sort of help them close that gap around, or give them insight, data, or any of that. So I think like that's something that I miss again as well, designing something on Figma and all of that. Figma it shows something cool. I was like, hey, I want to do that. I was like, I don't have time to do any of that. There's new libraries on tech side of things. On front end, I want to do. I was like, I can't do. So I think I have to be okay with doing this. And I have to learn myself sort of like, hey, this is my new journey. And that's when I mentioned about the entrepreneurial journey, where there was the start, there was validation, there was now like scaling up and mostly on like high growth companies. I saw this book called like High Growth Handbook from Elad Gil, is like the best one that I've seen so far, that whenever I have an issue, I could actually look at that and there's actually a chapter about it. So knowing that this is a very common thing and growing pains to everything is what every founder sort of goes through in this journey. I think the best advice that I even got and I believed myself is this journey. Trust this journey. It's going to make you better because it's going to challenge you and sort of. And maybe one of the reasons why not a lot of people try this is because it is hard. It is a hard journey. You're going to learn so much. You're going to make a lot of experiences through that. So I think that would be that. It's hard to articulate the entire thing because every day is changing. Every day is a new thing that you are learning. Every day is going to be a lot of choices that you're going to make, whether it's good or bad, whether mistakes or not. You will learn from them and be okay with the journey.
Yeah, it's hard because it's growth, it's challenging, and it's not really what you're doing, as a designer and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of my journey as well. And one thing that I was previously an engineer, then a designer, now I would say entrepreneur or a small business owner, is that just like you miss Figma, you miss Sketch and designing, right? And how I mentally kind of made sense out of it is like I went from designing interfaces to designing a company, designing the company culture, designing, what basically my employee experience or my team experience. So I'm still designing in a way, but I'm designing something else. I'm designing a company is how I thought of it. It's like, I'm still a designer, but it's like a different journey now. I'm not just designing files and interfaces and apps.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've learned throughout the journey is to surround yourself with amazing people that will help you learn as well. I really love that I've got like amazing co-founder that it's the areas that I like mostly about like scaling up companies to sort of financial side, investor side of things as well. So that I'm very focused on the, like you mentioned, designing that experience for the company. And then now there's like an amazing team building that up that understands that I'm doing this for the first time as well. So I think it's very important to keep that communication around and set those expectations that, hey, there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be so much learning around this journey, and maybe use the Figma to design the organizational structure instead of like doing a UI.
Yeah, very cool. Well, we're going to wrap this up. And if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of you? It's the best way.
I'm on Twitter @reallyNattu, and Instagram, everywhere else is really Nattu. That's what you do when any new service comes up. You just go and get your username. So I'm on Twitter almost like throughout my day. I'm just reachable right there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.